Hello, wizards. It's Dev, SBMTG down there. We like it to magic all that stuff. You know the whole spiel by now. You've been with me all spoiler season. And on that note, today is the final day of previous season for War of the Spark. I've got like 30 cards to cover today that I didn't do yesterday, but there's plenty of limited gems in here and some real diamonds in the proverbial rough, so let's go ahead and talk about them. Now first I got to show you 3 cards that tell a story. Here's Trusted Pegasus, Divine Arrow, and Unlikely Aid. Trusted Pegasus is actually exactly the kind of limited creature that you want to have. A 3-mana 2/2 flyer is just a Windrake, which is already good in and of itself, but it's one of these creatures that whenever it attacks, another creature without flying that you control that's also attacking gains flying. It can gift flight to another one of your creatures, and these are always very, very good and limited. Look out for it. But also, look out for Divine Arrows, because your horse will go down. It's really sad artwork, honestly. I'm more concerned for the Pegasus than I am Gideon falling off of it. Especially once you know that Rakdos is going to rush down and catch Gideon. You're like, oh, damn, Rakdos? It's a pretty sweet story moment, but I really feel bad for this Pegasus. Divine Arrow, though, is fine limited removal. It just deals 4 to an attacking or blocking creature. It's basically Gideon's Reproach, but that's also a good limited card. It's just 2 mana instant speed removal in the limited environment, and that's always welcome. But Unlikely Aid is a tool against limited removal. For the most part, it's 2 mana, is also instant speed. A creature gets +2/+0 and gains indestructible until end of turn. As far as constructed level, indestructible tricks a la Blossoming Defense and the like, I think Sheltering Light is a much better option for the most part than this card, but I do like that it gives a big boost to the creature, so it can go indestructible and kill a bigger creature in combat, which is sometimes really important. Or, that said, if your opponent thinks you're just going to Lightning Strike it and get away with not blocking it, well, you can not lose your creature, they lose their Lightning Strike, and you get a couple extra damage in. There's a lot I like about this card. But if you want some really good removal that Unlikely Aid actually can't do anything about, here's Prison Realm right here. It's just kind of an O-ring side print, 3 mana, 2 and a white for an enchantment. When it ETBs, you exile a creature or planeswalker an opponent controls until Prison Realm leaves the battlefield. And when Prison Realm enters the battlefield, you also scry 1. That's actually really, really good. I like having O-Ring back in the format. We did get Law Mage's Binding, and it's basically an O-Ring for creatures only that has Flash at this same converted mana cost. And it saw pretty much 0 play, even though it looks like a fairly powerful card. And I imagine Prison Realm is probably not going to see too much play either, although you really can't ever discount an Onion Ring. You'll also sometimes see enchantments like this in the 3-drop slot of certain decks, because they already have, an overflow of 4-drop removal and 2-drop removal, and they need to smooth out their curve some, and that's one of the reasons that you might see a piece like this in this environment. But that's okay, because it'll help you get your 4th land some of the time, and again, help you find a planeswalker or another threat of your own. Now, there are a couple of other white cards for limited that I at least need to show you. Here's Ironclad Crovod, Enforcer Griffin, and Battlefield Promotion. Now, Crovod and Griffin are nothing more than decently statted bodies that could be, say, the 22nd or 23rd creature in your deck. Especially Griffin. I have no real problem with a 5-mana 3/4 flyer. Not the best raid in the world, but at the common level, it's a flyer you'll probably play often. But Battlefield Promotion actually looks like a pretty good combat trick. 2 mana, 1 and a white for an instant, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Creature gains 1st strike until end of turn, and you gain 2 life. The 2 life is relatively incidental, but against aggressive decks in limited, it's going to be a welcome extra bit of text on the card. I like the fact that it puts a counter on the creature and doesn't just last until end of turn, especially in a format full of Proliferate that could really, really matter. But the 1st strike is actually one of the things I like most about the card. A +1/+1 counter and 1st strike is all a lot of creatures are going to need to win a combat interaction against another creature in limited and stick around. So this could actually be a huge gain that has an effect on the game even after you've cast it. Not only does your creature win that combat, but it gets to keep the counter, which is actually really, really nice in terms of what you usually get out of combat tricks in limited. But not to be outdone, Black got a bunch of really interesting limited cards today, too. We saw Tidebearer Giant, Vampire Opportunist, Charity Extractor, and Duskmantle Operative. Most of these have really, really good flavor text. I do think the flavor text on Tidebearer Giant is a little bit ham-fisted, although funny in concept. And it's an okay card in and of itself. 6 mana is a bit much, but it immediately replaces itself. It's a big body and limited, and that's where you're probably going to play this card. It's like a huge Dusk Legion Zealot. I have no problem with that. Opportunist is a good curve filler. Just a 2-power, 2-mana creature is always decent enough. It's got a relevant creature type, but I don't think really in this limited environment Vampire is very relevant. Aside from that, yeah, if you do have 7 mana in the very late game and you need a way to break stalls or whatever, this is a decent way to do it, but you're mostly playing it as a curve filler in your 2-drop slot. Charity Extractor, 4 mana for a 1/5 lifelink is actually a little bit better than it looks. It's got a huge butt on it, just sits there and blocks their biggest creatures on the ground while gaining you life at the same time, canceling out or helping to cancel out other smaller creatures that might actually get through on you. It's a fine creature, but again, nothing to get super excited about, but again, a decent curve filler if you're looking for that 22nd or 23rd card to fill out your deck. Aside from that, though, Duskmantle Operative is maybe my favorite of these in terms of function. Just a 2 mana 2/2, again, it's a bear, so in limited, this is a decent curve filler, and you don't even have to be looking for, a creature late in your deck building process. This probably slots right in to, any black limited deck right away. They have to usually burn a small creature and trade in combat in order to actually block this. Now, green got a couple of good limited cards to talk about, too. We got Crawl Stinger, New Horizons, and Snare Spinner. Now, I love the new art on New Horizons. It's beautiful. And New Horizons has renewed purpose in a format with Proliferate. So, in limited, I think this is going to be a great ramp piece that you can very often follow up with Proliferate tricks and get a lot more value out of it than you usually would. As far as Crawl Stinger goes, I love this kind of creature in limited, so really help equalize the game against bigger ground creatures, and I always like death touch creatures in limited. Aside from that, though, Snare Spinner is really interesting. It's just a 2 mana 1/3 reach, so it can actually block small flyers in the early game pretty well. Been talking about Wind Drakes. I talk about them in every preseason, I like Wind Drakes in limited, but this comes down before a Wind Drake type creature and blocks it all day without dying. As a matter of fact, you can even kill the Wind Drake because it gets that +2/+0, which means that when it blocks flyers, you've effectively paid 2 mana for a 3/3 reach, which is really nice. And I don't think that it slots in the sideboard against mono blue or anything. Still doesn't do anything against Tempest Gen, but it's at least an interesting call because this blocks early flyers all day. Now, there are a bunch of blue cards, too, that got previewed today that I think will be really nice in limited. We saw Sky Theater Strix, Aven Eternal, Callous Dismissal, and Thunder Drake. Actually, yesterday. I keep saying today, but it was yesterday. Thunder Drake, I really like. 4 mana for a 2/3 flyer. Again, not the absolute best rate in the world, but if you can cast 2 spells in a turn, even once, it becomes a decent rate. 4 mana for a 3/4 flyer is much better, and anything beyond that is crazy. I don't think that this goes into standard. There's just way better options, but in limited, if you can find ways to, say, cast multiple spells twice, then this just becomes like the best creature in your deck in terms of rate. So I really like Thunder Drake, and I think it's going to do a lot of limited work, especially in draft where you can build around it a little bit more. Callous Dismissal, I like this too. Just 2 mana for a bounce effect, and you get a body out of it, which is kind of like card advantage, or at least it feels that way. Yeah, they'll eventually get to recast their creature or whatever, but in terms of tempo, kind of a huge swing. Getting a body on the battlefield and returning something to their hand is a fairly big gain all at once, and that's why the card is sorcery speed. Were it instant speed, it would be an absolute slam dunk, possibly competitive playable card, but even as it is, this is fine tempo and limited if you're building that deck. Aven Eternal doesn't look super great upon first inspection, but again, this is a Wind Drake, but better. 3 mana, 2/2 flyer that's already playable in most limited environments, but this too brings another body on the battlefield with it. So you go wide with a flyer, and yeah, you keep a creature on the ground, but that's there to block or just get through on attacks against slower decks too. This is an awful lot of power. If there was just a 3 mana 3/3 in limited, that's functionally decent. Centaur Courser or whatever it was called. Just 3 mana 3/3 is playable in limited. This is 3 mana for, again, 3 power, 3 toughness, but on 2 bodies, and one of those bodies is evasive. So this is actually an insanely good limited card by my evaluation, and it's pretty amazing, too, that it's common for what it's worth. Doesn't look like much on the first reading, but I like it a lot. Not really sure why the angels in the flavor text are nervous, because I think most angels are way bigger than this creature, but whatever. The card is actually really good and limited. As far as Sky Theater Strix, I like this card an awful lot. It's like a flame urchin, it's got a version of prowess, but it flies. Giving it evasion is such a huge upgrade over a card like Fire Urchin. Even though it loses a point of toughness, it really doesn't matter. This is going to get in for a lot more damage over the course of a game than a card like Urchin would, just because it has the evasion. Really, really nice. If you're building a sort of prowessy spells deck in Limited, we've already seen a couple of cards like Thunder Drake, for instance, that are good with that kind of strategy. So it's possible to draft up a deck where, you prioritize a spells build, and cards like not only Thunder Drake, but Sky Theater Strix are going to go insanely well in that. And honestly, this is even a budget option for standard decks for what that analysis is worth. I think this is actually a really cool card with really awesome art too. Now, while I'm pointing out interesting Limited cards, there are also a few artifacts that got previewed yesterday that are pretty nice looking, like Guild Globe, Mana Geode, and Prismite. Prismite, again, curve filler, just a 2-mana, 2-power creature that literally any deck can play, but it's going to help fix your mana in Limited a lot. I do like the card. I feel like it's worth playing, especially if you're looking for stuff to fill up your deck, at the end of your deck building. Then, yeah, I could see this going in Limited pretty easily, especially if you're playing, more than 2 colors. This is almost a direct include. As far as the other colors, though, good ways, again, to fix your mana in Limited. We didn't get lockets or anything in this Limited environment, but these are all at the common level, and they're all pretty decent. Mana Geode is a better manalith in every way, just strictly better manalith. When it enters the battlefield, Scry 1, again, you cannot discount how good Scry can be on occasion, and it's a ramp piece. Like, sign me up for Mana Geode in Limited, and it's beautiful too. For what it's worth, it's a gorgeous looking card that I want to see in foil, but I like Guild Globe a lot too. This kind of feels like a prophetic prism in some ways, and that card saw some play in the last standard in the artifact decks. But Guild Globe is just 2 mana for an artifact. When it ETBs, draw a card. You can pay 2 and tap it to sack it to add 2 mana of different colors. So again, I like this fixes your mana, directly fixes. I wish it ramped in some way, but that would be a little bit broke, Again, gorgeous art on this card. Enters the battlefield, draw a card is actually a very, very good ability if you're looking to play artifacts in your deck. If you're building Sai, Saheeli, whatever, this is probably your 2-drop artifact of choice for constructed, but even in Limited, it's a fine way to fix your mana if you need to do that in a deck that's more than 2 colors, and draw a card is one of the best things you can do in the entire game. Oh yeah, there's also Gateway Plaza. Obviously a reprint. I've seen Gateway Plaza a bunch, but this is easily the best art. Actually, I won't say that. Gateway Plaza always has really nice art, and this is a completely different feel than we usually get on Gateway Plaza, but it's still really pretty, and that's really all you can say about it, because we all know that Gateway Plaza is not the best card. Aside from that, though, we also saw Rubble Belt Rioters. I am a little bit interested in this, but I'm wary at the same time. 3 mana, 1, a red and a green for a 0/4 human berserker with haste, and when it attacks, it gets +X+0 until end of turn, where X is the greatest power among creatures that you control, and this card has really, really good flavor text. Now, this looks tempting in standard. You go like Zerta Goblin on turn 2, you get this on turn 3, swing 6. It's not the worst play in the world. However, there's also the idea of like playing Galta and immediately swinging with this, and just getting, swinging for 12 power. Seems nice. Once you get to swing with both of them, you're swinging 24 at the very least. So that's nice. But there is a problem with this card, and that's that all you have to do is get rid of your biggest creature. And they're also kind of neutering your Rioters. I don't like that it has to have another creature on board to support it. Usually not a huge fan of those kind of cards, but at the same time, if you are playing an aggressive Limited deck, then you should have plenty of ways to enable this card. And even in Standard, if you just got like a Nullhide Ferox on the board with this thing, then that seems pretty decent. Note that the other creature doesn't have to be attacking. You can play this on turn 3, Nullhide Ferox on turn 4, and suddenly swing for 6 with this. So again, there are pros and cons to this card, but I think the cons are just too many for the card to actually do anything in Standard. But in an aggressive Limited deck, this is a great way to fill out your curve. There was also Dread Malkin. Obviously, I like this because it's a zombie cat. I like to think that somehow, some way, it's Sacred Cat. But this is just 1 blight mana for a 1/1 zombie cat with menace, and you can pay 2 and a black and then sacrifice another creature or a planeswalker to put 2+1/+1 counters on the kitty. Now that is actually pretty good, but it's also extremely mana intensive, and sacrificing the creature, while it can be turned into an upside, obviously, not always the best thing in the world in your Limited deck. Especially considering I don't usually like 1 mana 1/1s no matter how much the upside, usually in Limited. There have been a few over time that have been really, really nice, the exception to the rule, but I'm not a huge fan of this in Limited, even if you can make it a 5/5. You had to do some work to do that, pay a bunch of mana, sacrifice a couple of permanents. Usually you don't want to get rid of a planeswalker, but I can see times where a Planeswalker is not too useful in the limited environment at the very least. You get it down to one loyalty and it just sits there like an enchantment doing whatever its passive ability is. And that might not be that important to you, so sacrificing a Planeswalker might be a little bit easier and more profitable for this card than I currently think it is. I'm open to that, but at the same time, I'm a little wary of this card, even though I do love it. I do love cats, and I do love the flavor text. It's exactly what a cat would do. But aside from that, I'm just not a huge fan, and I really don't think it goes in Standard Aristocrats. I've heard some people talk about that. It's a one-drop sack outlet, but again, the mana requirement is that's a huge commitment. 3 mana is a lot more than it sounds like. So I'm not sure that I'm a fan in a constructed deck, or in limited for that matter, but do I like the card? Yeah, personally, the card's awesome. There are a couple of other things I wanted to get to today that look a little bit beyond the pale, like a little bit better than just your typical limited fodder. And one of them is Bleeding Edge. Now, I'm really not convinced about this card, but it also looks really, really powerful. This is just 3 mana, 1 and 2 black for sorcery. Up to 1 target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn, and then you amass 2. So this is a 3 mana 2/2 that gives a creature -2/-2 when it ETBs, which is actually a pretty good rate for that effect. It's a 2-for-1 in a lot of games, which is great. In the early game, I'm not sure that this is going to replace Moment of Craving in Standard. I highly doubt that it does. But just like I said earlier with the Oblivion Ring side grade, some decks will seek to, have 3 mana removal just to smooth out their curve a little bit. They might have too much 2 mana removal, too much 4 mana removal. And both of those are very, real things in this upcoming Standard. There's a lot of good removal at those slots. It's no Ravenous Chupacabra, but it is 1 mana less than Ravenous Chupacabra. And it's usually going to take out a lot of creatures that are either on or up under the curve from it. So I've got my eye on this card. I'm not sure that it actually does anything, but that is an incredibly powerful effect for what it's worth. And again, in limited, this is a ridiculous removal piece. Now, this won't be the last card we talk about today, but if there is one card that I think is more of a shoo-in for Standard play than a lot of the cards that we saw over the last 24 hours, it's probably Return to Nature, if only because this looks like a really good sideboard card. 2 mana, 1 and a green for an instant, destroy target artifact or enchantment, or exile a card from a graveyard. It's modal. Now, this, I'm not sure that there aren't better ways to blow up artifacts and enchantments currently in Standard. There may be. But this looks like, just off the rip, at first evaluation, one of the better ways. Really, really cheap way to do it. It's instant speed. Between these 3 options, the card is almost main deckable, but not quite. It's just kind of the total package for a sideboard card, so I expect it to possibly see some play. Now, I should probably cover this card last, but it's not the card I'm most excited about. This is Plane-Wide Celebration, the last rare to be revealed in the set. 7 mana, 5 and 2 green for a sorcery. Choose 4. You can choose the same mode more than once. You either create a 2/2 citizen creature token, that's all colors, or you return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand, or you proliferate, or you gain 4 life. So you can gain like 16 life. Pretty good. You can put like 8 power worth of tokens into play, all the options on this are decent, but it's hard to add up 4 modes that make it seem worth it. And I also don't like the casting cost. 7 mana is a huge price tag. There's probably a lot better stuff you could be doing with it. But this could also just be, an awful lot of value all in one card. 8 life and a couple of bodies on the battlefield or whatever you want to be doing with it. All of that seems pretty decent. It'll catch you way back up when you're behind, no matter how, in what way you're behind, life total or board state, whatever. So the card looks really good if it resolves, but it's getting to cast it in the first place that I'm kind of not super excited about. But I'm pretty sure that my favorite card from the last 24 hours that I didn't talk about yesterday, if you didn't see that video, go back and watch it. It's got all the good cards from the final day, the quote-unquote good cards. Watch that, link in the description. But my favorite card of all the cards I didn't get to talk about yesterday is Wall of Runes. I'm serious. I'm totally serious. It's just 1 blue mana for a 0/4 wall with Defender, and when it ETBs, you scry 1. And it's got hilarious flavor text, although, again, a little ham-fisted, like a slightly overbaked flavor text. I think you could have made this more concise and therefore slightly funnier. But anyway, I'm not here to really judge that. And who am I? I just like the fact that this slots directly into the Huatley High Alert, I guess, Arcades Sabbath deck. You don't even have to play Arcades the Strategist in that deck anymore. But this goes in that deck because it does have Defender, and that's what Arcades works with. But just in that deck, should have shorthanded that, but in that deck, this is a great one-drop. You know, you get basically a 4-power one-drop that scries when it ETBs on turn 1, so it gets you, you know, it helps you find extra lands if that's what you're looking for, but it also, obviously, helps you get to that turn 3 Watley or that turn 3 High Alert that you need to really set the game off. That deck is already, like, really based around one-drops, or at least my build is. The build that I've had the most success with, you can see that on the channel if you want to, but the build I've had the most success with just tries to go as low as possible and finish the game off as quickly as it can. You know, usually turn 4, you want to be swinging for 1,000,000 in that deck. So this goes really well with that. Helps you, you know, keep your board presence up early. Blocks really, really well until you do get your High Alert or your Watley down. And then you're just in business with a 4-power dude that you paid a whole mana for. So I'm a huge fan of this card. Like, I can't begin to tell you how much I like this thing. Even though it looks really innocuous and we'll see absolutely no work outside of that one deck, this is a really, really good card in that deck. Oh, wait, I have missed a card, and it's a card that I really should talk about. This is Elite Guard Mage right here. Final card of the day, I think. I don't think I missed anything else. But 4 mana, it's 2, a white and a blue for a 2/3 human wizard with flying. And when it ETBs, you gain 3 life and draw a card. That's powerful. That is a very powerful enter the battlefield trigger, and it's meant to remind us all of Cloudblazer, which was a played card, but not often. You know, you'd see a 2 of Cloudblazer in Panharmonicon decks, which weren't actually that competitive to begin with, but it was a perfect card for that deck. We don't have Panharmonicon in this format, so I really doubt Elite Guard Mage is doing anything, but at the same time, you know, it wasn't long ago that we had a 3-mana dude that drew us a card and gave us some energy when it came into play, and that thing was banned. So I think that 4 mana is a much higher rate practically than 3 mana is, and I'm not sure the season he played because the actual power to toughness ratio for what you're putting into it is not very high, but the ETB value is incredibly high. And this will even catch you up against aggro, put more cards in your hand immediately, replaces itself, and I like that about it. So there's just so much good on this card. I just wonder if it's barely priced out of the format. And so ends another spoiler season. Probably the craziest spoiler season since I started doing this whole YouTube thing. This was a nutso preview season, y'all, and I appreciate you for sticking with me for this. But, you know, if you don't know much about me because you just like subscribe for previews or whatever and you've never seen my fat face before, then please stick around. You know, now things get really serious. From here on out, we're doing list videos, pre-release guide, gonna start going hard on it, and then decks really, really soon. You know, if you're not a patron yet, get in there for $1 and you can help vote on what decks you want to see this season. If you are a patron, those votes start next week, early next week, maybe as early as Monday. Actually, I'll have 10 or 20 decks up that I want to build, and you get to help me pick. So if you haven't done that yet, link in the description. Just throw $1 a month into the Patreon. You get to pick what decks you want to see. Aside from that, subscribe if you haven't done it. I really hope you keep going on this journey with me and all the rest of the wizards. We got a lot of decks to talk about. This set really lends itself to brewing, and it's been hard to figure out exactly where to start, but I got a good handle on things, and I got a bunch of decks I want to bring you. So make sure you stick with us, subscribe if nothing else, like the video if you enjoyed it, go over to TCG Player. You can still pre-order the set at below MSRP, and they've still got plenty of supply as far as that goes, so get on over there, hit the link in the description. You can pre-order singles if you want to build decks when the set comes out. Lots of reasons to check them up. Do it. They sponsor me. So go over there. They're also the lowest place you're going to get prices on both singles and pre-order products. So hit the link in the description if you're interested. And aside from that, just let me know how you felt about not only the cards today, because there were a bunch of actually decent looking cards that are kind of hidden amongst a bunch of like limited chaff, but there's some good stuff today. Let me know how you felt about those, but also just the set at large. How hyped are you? Do you think it's a good set or a bad set? This set does have its detractors online, so let me know how you feel about the whole kit and caboodle down there in the comments section. We'll have a discussion, but apart from that, pretty sure my job here is done for now. So I've been Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.